Hello, and welcome to Compose Carolina, a virtual summer music series presented by the UNC Department of Music and Carolina Performing Arts. I am Alan Anderson. I am a professor, a composer by inclination, and head of the composition area in the UNC Department of Music. Composition plays an important, though often unrecognized role in all musicians' lives. It is closely related to improvisation, or the art of speaking through one's medium, of creating and ordering utterance, not so much out of thin air, but from an alertness to the possibilities for notes and rhythms, instruments, performers, and circumstance. Composition implies decisions and determinations. It is one of many ways that musicians learn to hear themselves and to understand the shapes of their musical experience. At UNC, we offer a number of classes related to music composition. In addition to a course called simply Composition, which considers music in its notated and largely instrumental forms without particular regard for genre or style, and which aims to help the student realize its individual compositional tendencies, we also offer jazz composition and arranging, songcraft, beat making, courses in music technologies, and improvisation, both as a dedicated study and as a mode of practice within an instrumental studio. And I will add, composition plays a role in the study otherwise called music theory. While the number of students weaving a path through one or more of these classes is somewhat difficult to tally, students taking composition, often for multiple semesters, number between 8 and 12 at any one time. The 6 composers featured in the Compose Carolina series have all been a part of that class. Their musical inclinations run to chamber music, solo writing for their own instrument, music for jazz band, film music, and free improvisation, but I wouldn't want to categorize any one of them too narrowly. Others who have studied composition at UNC have gone on to write for musical theater, video games, ventured into computer music and sound design, write orchestral music, or music for bands. Over 6 weeks, Compose Carolina is featuring students and recent alumni who have written original works that vary in style and instrumentation, but are connected by the common theme, looking forward, interpreted however these musicians pleased. My composition colleagues Stephen Anderson, whose work spans concert and jazz music, and Lee Weissert, whose work is fundamentally informed by wide-ranging music technologies, will join me in introducing and interviewing the featured composers. We're very excited to share what they've created. It's time to hear some music. Let's meet this week's Carolina composer. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Compose Carolina, Episode 3. Welcome back, those of you who have tuned in to the previous episodes. I am Alan Anderson. It's my pleasure to be here and to be the host for this week's discussion. Our composer this week is Christian Cail. I've known Christian for maybe 4 years now. He was a student at UNC, graduated in 2019. He's a guitarist, an electric guitarist in particular, which is really close to my heart. That was in my musical background as well. He's a proponent of, among other things, sort of free improvisation. He sort of has moved in those circles, those performance circles, for some time now. I would say that Christian has a ravenous appetite for musics of all kinds, however. So the music that you're going to hear today, you will show the influences from a number of different sources. I also would important to point out about Christian that he is a student in the greater sense of the word of political thought and economic concepts, which will probably become evident as we talk through with him about his past and his present and presumably into the future. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I wonder if we could start off by having you tell us something about your musical background, sort of how you started with music, and maybe throw in there some early memories about writing, under what context you started composing music.
Yeah, so the first musical group that I really enjoyed and really sort of solidified to me that I needed to play music was Led Zeppelin. And that really, towards the end of elementary school and into middle school, had like an extreme obsession, I'd say, with Led Zeppelin, and then that developed into an obsession with early blues music. And then from there, I eventually got into John Coltrane and Cecil Taylor, and explored jazz pretty in depth for a while. And so in high school, finally, I went to the University of North Carolina School of Arts for classical guitar. And it was there that I discovered that I wasn't a very good classical guitar player, although I have many fond memories of playing classical guitar, and I still play my classical guitar, and I still use a lot of the techniques, you know, but I realized that I really enjoyed composing music and sort of being the more of the architect of music than just playing it, you know. So after that, I decided that I wanted to go to UNC, and then that's where I met you.
That's almost up to the present. But I'm curious to know, looking back, you're interested in Led Zeppelin. Did you play in a cover band?
I didn't play in a Led Zeppelin cover band, but I was in a cover band when I was a kid called Peace of Mind. But peace, you know, peace of mind as in, you know, like world peace or whatever. And we were just like little kids. It was really fun though.
Were you writing material for that band or subsequent bands?
We actually we wrote one song for like an anti-drug campaign at some point for like I think it was like kind of like a DARE program thing, but that was about it.
So when did you actually start putting ideas or in some form or recorded form or whatever that you look at as saying, well, that's when I sort of started writing?
That would have been in middle school. I wrote a bunch of songs. I wouldn't be able to say that they were any good, but I wrote a bunch of songs in middle school. And then in high school, one of the ways that I would explore harmony, which was my first like real love in music, is I would write songs. And so I'd write, you know, songs with, you know, every kind of conceivable voicing of, you know, a major seventh or, you know, fully diminished seventh chords and so on, and just try to explore them through the act of creation, you know. But I don't know if they were any good. I never actually played any of them. It was all like theoretical. But then in high school, finally, I wrote something that was performed in senior recital in high school, and that was a lot of fun. And that's when I really knew that I could keep doing it, you know, that I'd found something that I really liked.
Yeah. So the way you're describing it, it sounds like these songs that you were working on were simultaneously helping you understand your instrument, some elements of music theory, various ways that notes can fit together. When you said that you wrote some music that was played in high school, were you a performer in that? Were you a participant in that performance? Yeah. So that seems to be an element in your history, that you write music that in some way or another you can participate in. You say a little more about that, maybe? We may come back to that question again later too, after we hear some music.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to like, why do you make music? So like sometimes when I'm writing music, it's because I'm creating a puzzle, and it's fun to kind of play a game. A game which is, you know, kind of simultaneously you can explore, and it's a little bit didactic with yourself, and which kind of produces something at the end, you know. So you kind of, that's like, and then sometimes you hear a melody in your head that's just beautiful, and you've got to put it down because it's pretty and it feels like something, you know. And then other times, and this is, it might just be because maybe it's the narcissist in me or something, but I kind of like a guy who, you know, is featured in his own movies, you know, the directors who are also the main characters. So a lot of the music that I write, it does just like feature me prominently. One, because I trust myself to be able to pull it off, I guess, but also because, I don't know, I really like the people who are like that, you know. Paganini is one of these types where it's like, they're almost more of like a gunslinger or something, or like a swordsman. You know, they have this kind of really quick, adroit playing style, but also these compositions which not only show it off, but are also like really, really fun. And I enjoy kind of doing that, I guess.
Well, in many music traditions, including the classical music tradition that you were just alluding to, this is actually fairly common, and it's really only been more in the recent past, I guess, or that composers have sort of separated themselves from that performance aspect. You're in a fine tradition there, certainly, in writing parts for yourself. I wonder if you could maybe turn to the piece that you've written for this Composed Carolina summer series. It's a piece called, the title is Angelus Novus, but cut into a million pieces. Now that's a provocative title, and one sort of want to pull that apart in various ways. I wonder if you could tell us a bit, I mean, starting anyway, just with the title itself. What might we what help can you give us on understanding your title, Angelus Novus?
So it comes from a Paul Klee painting called Angelus Novus, and it's referenced by the, I guess, Marxist philosopher and historian Walter Benjamin, who admittedly I haven't read much of his work in particular, but I really enjoyed his description of that painting and sort of what he read into it, and he sort of reads into it as this depiction of history itself, or the arc of history. It's very like Hegelian, I guess. This sort of history being this creature that's sort of watching over the transformation of society and material conditions or whatever. But it's very evocative, and it gets across what I was feeling, I guess.
Yeah. So that does relate to some of what I alluded to in the introduction about your interest in 20th century philosophy, and actually, I suppose, earlier as well. Again, we might come back to that. So the piece that you've written, which I will tell the listeners right now, is just over 4 minutes long. It's always generally a good thing. Often, I should say, it's often helpful to know how long the piece is that one is going to be settling into here. But that said, could you give a little description of how this piece came together? What was your compositional process like for this piece?
Right. So the theme, obviously, looking forward or looking ahead, and I kind of thought about that idea, looking forward, which is something that's kind of impossible to do. Obviously, there's unless you're like a soothsayer or a prophet or something, which I don't think anyone is, you can't accurately just kind of read into the future. But I kind of thought about that, and I thought about how if you really know history, right, and if you sort of have a keen kind of measure of indicators in history, you can actually manage to look forward rather accurately. So like an example that I was thinking of is the Marxist theoretician and historian Karl Kautsky, who I believe it was 1901 in his pamphlet, The Social Revolution, with almost painstaking accuracy predicts a pan-European civil war from which there will be a socialist revolution that will ultimately be strangled by the war itself, which are kind of almost to the T happened. And so that it makes me think that, okay, so, if you really know history and know what to look for in particular, you can kind of have a glimpse at the contradictions which form the future. Okay, so that's what I was thinking of. So obviously, how do you describe that musically? Well, you can't. It's not like the thing that I don't like about music, and I love music a lot. The thing I don't like about music is that you can't be immediately descriptive. You know what I mean? You can't. You can paint a picture of someone, but you can't make a melody that is, someone. And it makes it very difficult to kind of like get a it's a very abstract form. And so the way I kind of tried to work that in is, I said to myself, okay, well, instead of writing a piece of music that is going to communicate this, I will turn the composition into me telling the history of the individual units from which the composition is based. So I wrote down on like 25 note cards various textures, fuzziness, woodiness, organ, out of tune acoustic guitar, the chorus. And then I would, throw those up in the air and then laid them out. So it's totally at random. And then I did the same thing for melodies. So I had this kind of sonic or textural thing, and then I had a melodic thing. And then the actual composition part was me not necessarily like composing, but doing what a historian does, and is basically looking at these indicators in history, whether it be primary documents, whether it be other works of history, and so on, and then putting together a story, which then just becomes the piece, I guess. And so that was my way of trying to, I guess, be relevant, or like true to the theme. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's what I did.
Yeah. So okay, so here's a truth-telling question. And I suppose they all are. And we'll never know if you're telling the truth or not in your answer, but you laid out your note cards in a certain order, and then did you stick to it? Did you say, that's it, I've got to use that?
I did, against all desire and intuition, because one of the ones that I landed on was a chorus, and so I had to sing this whole chorus. I did not want to do that, Alan. It was totally beyond me. It was not something I really wanted to do, and I was kind of lucky. It's not some of the ones I really wanted to do. Like there's a whole section of like a cascading slide guitar that's got some wah-wah on it in a 5/4, the time signature. And I really looked forward to doing that one. I was really psyched about that one. But there's some of them that I really wasn't anticipating, and wasn't like super psyched to actually compose. But I would rather have that challenge than to have to come up with something totally on my own, which I do find really difficult.
Well, that is the composer's problem, isn't it? To come up with something.
It is.
So you alluded to electric guitar right there with slide and wah, and you said that the cards told you that you had to have a chorus, so that's in there. I'm going to actually read through the instrumentation to your piece and ask you a couple of questions about it, because it's different. So it's a kind of chamber orchestra, but not like one we've ever heard of before. So it has three electric guitar parts, an electric bass part, a drum set, which, by the way, do you play the drums?
Not well.
Okay. Are you playing on the recording?
No, I wish I was, but no, that's all. Okay. That's all MIDI.
Back to all right. Flute part, bassoon part, clavichord, which is such an interesting instrument that in most circumstances you'd never hear it because it's so quiet. But there it is, a clavichord part, a part labeled strings, piano, which is understandable, electric piano, that's also understandable, organ. Then there are boom whacker tubes. Okay, what are boom whacker tubes?
Boom whackers, you may find them in a like preschool music class. Generally, is where most people might have interfaced with them, but they're these little tubes that if you smack them, they produce like a sound like clunk, 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 and then you might grab another one and be like clunk, 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 and then if you smack them in different orders, you can create a melody.
Ah, okay. So that's the instrumentation. Oh, and of course the chorus part, which you mentioned earlier. Right. So can you kind of describe what this is a composer's problem? How did you assemble this particular group? Why these instruments for the purposes of this particular project?
You're gonna hate this answer, but it's just because I really like the way those instruments sound.
Good,
no rhyme or reason. Yeah,
there will be
always. and flute because I just love the way they sound. And then, you know, because I play the guitar, you know, three's better than one. So, you know, no great reason at all.
Yeah, you do have a string quartet in there, 3 guitars and electric bass. So yeah, string quartet, not the one we usually think of, but that's fine. Yeah, certainly good. Yeah, so as you say, you pulled up the card that said chorus, and you said, "Oh, I've got to come up with the chorus part." You selected a text. Could you say something about the text? Actually, I'll read it. Here are the words, because as it goes by in the performance, the listeners may not pick this up. But the text says, "We foretell objective changes to the world, and we change the world." Tell us about that. Those lyrics.
So that's from, yeah, that is from Nikolai Bukharin, of whom I'm, I guess, a kind of distant disciple, or to some extent, and that's from a work of his called Theory and Practice from the Standpoint of Dialectical Materialism. And yeah, he's just a terrific kind of Marxist economist, man of science, who was one of the heirs of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin in Soviet Russia. He sort of advocated for something like a mixed market economy, moving towards socialism in the 1920s. Eventually, in 27, 28, he was out-organized by Joseph Stalin. And then in 36, after being stripped of pretty much any power, he was finally murdered. He was shot in the head on the orders of Stalin. But he's one of those figures that tells his very person and his writings tell an alternative history of how things could have happened. And he's one of the people that I look to for kind of guidance in my, you know, writing and kind of interpretation of history. He's like a very, very tremendous historical figure for me.
Yeah. I earlier read the title of the composition. I would also just let the viewers, listeners know that there's a subtitle as well. 3 words that begin with B. The subtitle: Bushmen, Babylon, Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
Clearly, it's something to do with your reading of history, and presumably it doesn't end with ... but it plays into the looking forward theme of this series. Any extra thoughts you can share with us about that, the using of a subtitle and the significance for what we're about to hear?
Yeah, well, I think those 3 words capture a pretty wide array of social formation. So the Bushmen, or the sand people of kind of South Africa, are kind of pastoralists. They've been there for a very long time. And I actually, like in the past week, I've gone through a really big, as I often do, just kind of get like hyper obsessive about stuff. And I got into a really big sort of phase where reading about human evolution and its early civilization. So kind of coming out of Africa and the eventual kind of Mesopotamian societies, of which Babylon was one of many, and not necessarily a notable one, but it just starts with a B. And it also kind of is evocative of, you know, decadence and so on. I think mainly because of its biblical connotation. And then finally, so I'm sort of talking about like different modes of production. You know, there is a kind of pastoral, cattle herding, farming kind of mode of production, tribal. There is early civilization, so the creation of empires, and finally there is the kind of abortive and kind of bastardized first attempt at another social formation, which the Bolsheviks obviously are sort of you kind of herald that in, and you know, ultimately it I think, you know, obviously fails, but it's a notable direction in history. And insofar as the whole piece is like looking at history and the wide arc, I just wanted to kind of like open up the focus and the lens and sort of look back as far as I can.
Yeah. Thanks.
At least.
I think we're just about ready to listen to the performance or the composition here. Just maybe a couple of words. The nature of the recording that we're going to listen to, you alluded to earlier that there were MIDI files. You're not actually playing the bassoon. There is not a live musician playing the bassoon, but this is the wonders of music technology. The computer has created that part. And yet, on the other hand, the 3 guitar parts, if I'm not mistaken, you are playing. And also, I want our listeners to be aware that Christian is the chorus. He is singing all 4 parts. That's his wonderful falsetto that you were going to hear there when we play. So maybe any quick words on how you assembled all of this?
Patiently. Very patiently.
All right. And then maybe this question, I don't know that I would even like to have this question given to me, but I'll ask it anyway. This is going to be a first listen for everyone. And so any tips for the first time listener? Any bits of advice?
I don't know. I mean, when it comes to consuming any media, I think it's best just to like kind of focus on it. You know what I mean? So I guess just focus on it for the time that you're listening. That's what I do, at least.
Okay, then here we go. Let's listen to Angelus Novus. Wow, Christian, that's amazing. I love it.
Thank you.
The barely contained energy. In fact, even in that one place, and well, maybe a third of the way through, when it's just like it just opens up and the noise spills through. Really exciting stuff. This is not the first time I've heard it. Truth be told, so I've had a chance to listen a few times, and I've taken a few notes about stuff that I sort of want to go through. Yeah, lost you there for a second, but you're back. And so some things that I hear in listening to the music. First of all, your description of using the cards and that process, I can't say that I can tell that you were using cards, but the sectionality of the piece is really palpable. An important part of how it functions as a piece of music, that it has a section that might have maybe they're a little blending between them, but the differences of these sections are really easy to hear. And at a really gross level, I hear a kind of some passages in which the parts, for all their individual vividness and detail, they're synchronized in some way. They really seem like they're tightly affiliated with a meter. Those meters are shifting all over the place, but they're locked in. And then there are other places in which the parts are just kind of almost as if they're floating against the meter and floating in their relationship to one another. That's a sort of gross simplification of what I hear. And then just some other references that I pick up, which are interesting. And I'd like to, I sort of ask you about these. I hear what to my ears sounds like fusion jazz from the, maybe the early 70s. Your choral parts sound like an English madrigal to me. Those are the words I wrote down. Just the eclecticism and multiplicity of the parts. Again, that relates to the sectionality aspect and the way that the parts play against one another. Maybe the place I'd really like you to dig into a little bit is the embrace of noise and as an aesthetic position or as a sound position. I mean, the idea of noise is sort of in the air a lot these days in musical world, and there are noise bands for that matter, and there are people that are making something out of. Yeah, would you just maybe talk about that part? This is like it feels like it's longer, but I think it's only about a minute into the piece. It just goes like that for about 30 seconds. How'd that come to be?
Well, that card the card just said event. So it had to be something that was like extremely disruptive. And there's nothing more disruptive than a bunch of noise. Sounds like, well, I'll just do some noise there. So what I did is I had a recording of wind chimes. And if you listen really closely, you can hear occasionally a almost bell-like note will sort of like appear out of the kind of thicket of noise. Almost like if you're listening to the radio and sometimes it'll flicker onto, I don't know, church music for a second between the static, if you like listening to AM. And that's because it is actually a recording of wind chimes that are recorded on my phone. And then I put the recording through my amplifier and just like greased it out with a bunch of like fuzz and just grossness. And then I actually put it additionally through this pedal called a Tensor. It's by a company called Red Panda, and it's like basically like a time machine. You can like basically like chop up anything and sort of slow it down or whatever. And so I put it through that and was just like kind of just pumping the metal on it, and so it just came out like that. And then I took that track and then you put a bunch of reverb on it, and then I separated it, like I duplicated it, and then the duplication I made to be much lower to kind of like fill out the bottom end of your ears, and it's much more gravelly and kind of like, it's like, whereas the upper one's like, yeah, it's very difficult to describe these things without eventually making mouth noises. And that is what I came up with at the end.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think that that sound, which is perhaps the most aggressive and in-your-face moment in the composition, that comes from that delicate object, wind chimes. Really interesting,
Yeah.
that transformation. That, yeah. So you,
And again, towards the end, if you like at the very end during the kind of sliding guitar thing, and you have the clavichord, the dun 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 dun, that kind of section. There's a whole bit where it sounds like mouth noises, kind of chopped up, and it's the same thing. I like just recorded into my phone, like me kind of gargling and like coughing and just making noises with my mouth, and then I put it through the pedal and chopped it up, so it comes across like totally different.
yeah. So that's actually interesting. There's a question I have, sort of about this recording and about the composition. And I asked this question of the composers last week, a sort of similar thing. Does this piece exist now as a recording? And that is the, maybe I hate this word, but I'll use it anyway. Is that the artifact? Is there any possibility that this composition could be performed live? And what would that mean?
It would be really hard.
Uh-huh.
That would be tough. Yeah, I think it would be just hard to find subjects willing to do all of that, so there's like, I do think, differently in terms of like, there's certain things that you write for somebody, and I tend to only write music to be performed with a certain person in mind, if they're like already down to do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because as you well know, more so than me, that, you can put a lot of time and love and blood, sweat, and tears into something, and then it just gets like demolished on the bandstand. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's too much for the musicians to learn and too little time. I mean, there's any number of things can go wrong. So there's things that for me, there's things that I would write for, me to play with people in a small ensemble or whatever, but it kind of has to be already like, the organization has to be kind of already there. But this, I think this was like, exactly as you said, just sort of exist as an artifact, because it would be so difficult to get enough people to do it. And I don't have any money to pay them, you know what I mean? Well,
I'm curious about the possibility, and not to push you on this, really, and that's not what my intention here is. Just, I think there is a possibility. I mean, I'm looking at the parts; they're hard, but they're not impossible. So, I mean, theoretically, it could be done with, some of the stuff. You have a recorded track to go along with it. It'd be possible. So you actually gave me not only gave me the recording to listen to, but you sent me a score, which I appreciate. I always like looking at the notation, how somebody puts ideas down on the page. And a couple of things that caught my eye, I guess, and that I'd like to share with the listeners, viewers here, is that there are some places where the staff line has nothing in it. It's just empty, but that instrument is contributing. And mostly this is for one of your parts. One of the other of your parts is the guitar, and they're interesting little notes that you wrote, sort of to get you going on, I guess, what you're going to improvise in those spots. So there's one that says, "Enter with occasional volume swell jabs a la Derek Bailey or Fred Frith." And then another one says, "Bird noise solo." Another one says, "Fuzzed out fripp." So you've mentioned a couple of avant-garde guitar heroes there. If you mention it, just to say Fripp, what would that do for you?
Yeah, so well, I think that it's kind of funny, because it's like where the piece really begins is with these like textures, and I at least for me, I'm not very good at memorizing melodies. I've always really struggled with picking out melodies and stuff, but I'm gravitate towards just like picking up the melodies and like they're not the melodies, but sorry, the textures and the kind of gestures, like the larger things. And so that, I mean, that's obviously where the piece began, is with the textures on the note cards. And that's what I'm, because in those parts, and specifically the first thing that you mentioned, I'm improvising. So I'm kind of improvising with a certain textural thing in mind. And that kind of sound, or at least the reference in that case, was to like some of Henry Cail's music, where Fred Frith, in particular, there's a song called Deluge, I think on the album Unrest. But it's like kind of jabby stuff. Derek Bailey does it a lot. And the Fripp thing is just, he has this really nice tone that he actually does a lot with Brian Eno's music and stuff. It's just like it almost sounds like a human voice. And it's just like sustained for days kind of sound.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe.
Yeah, it usually is. But I mean, I'm happy to, again, as a sort of guitar player, I'm interested in the references to Derek Bailey and Fred Frith and that avant-garde world where you might play your guitar with a razor blade, or however you detune it in all kinds of different ways, and I love that stuff. So one of the features, Christian, of this series is that the viewers have a chance to write in questions, and I've got a couple coming in here. Let's go to some questions. One from Liam. At the beginning of the stream, you mentioned feeling like a swordsman with this piece. Can you talk more about that?
I guess I can. I kind of have to. Yeah. I think there's. I mentioned, of course, Paganini, and there's this tradition of people who are composers and virtuosos, and I guess, aspire to be both, right? And there's a kind of, this is going to sound so stupid, but there's a thing where, like, if you're watching a movie sometimes, especially kind of like action movies, you'll come across a character that you can sort of get invested in, right? And then you'll realize that they have a particular craft. So like in Westerns, it's always that they're a really quick shot and they're really accurate, you know what I mean? And sometimes you only find that out towards the end of the movie. Or like sometimes you'll have a character who only sword fights once, right? But they're like a formidable opponent, right? And that was always really inspiring to me as a kid, because it meant that no matter what happens in the movie, this character is someone who's a person of their craft, right? And they have a craft that they've developed, you know what I mean, with patience and care. And that you might only see it once in the part of the movie, but it intimates this other whole aspect of their life, which can't be filmed. It wouldn't make an interesting plot development, but it's there, that they're a person of who takes very seriously their craft. And that's always been a big part of being a musician to me, is like this part of playing guitar that's almost more akin to being like a swordsman, or like a shooter, you know what I mean? Like a good shot or something. I don't know. It's almost like a very childlike thing, but it's there nonetheless.
Yeah. So it's interesting. There's a question which, whether intended or not, it almost sounds like a follow-up to your answer, and that is, could you say if you're inspired by any magicians, wizards, or sorcerers?
I don't know any magicians or wizards personally, so I can't say I'm too inspired by them. Yeah, I mean, I guess in the same way, yeah, I guess in abstractly, I mean, music is basically like being a conjurer, you know what I mean? You don't really have, in my case, you don't really have control of inspiration. Sometimes you'll, and we were talking about this earlier, I'll get kind of a melody in my head or something that's like just fully there. It's just fully formed, almost divinely inspired, just there. And it's I came up with it, right? I thought of it first, but it doesn't feel like mine. You know what I mean? I didn't like write it out. It's almost like being contacted by something greater than yourself. It means inspiration. That's what it is. If you know, so I guess that's sort of like being a wizard, I guess.
Yeah. Viewer Ross asks, what is your favorite music movie?
I don't know what that, like my favorite movie that has music in it, or my favorite movie about music. I'm not exactly sure what's being asked. Huh?
Let's go with music, a movie that is somehow about music or a musician. Yeah, rather than music that's sound. Say it again.
I haven't seen very many. I haven't seen very many movies about music, I don't think, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think there's nothing that comes to mind. I don't know. Maybe The Sound of Music. Right. That's kind of a banger. But other than that.
All right. So one of the things I thought for this session that would be worthwhile, and I hope the listeners will actually either indulge me or think that this is a good idea, and that is to give ourselves a chance to hear your piece again. We heard it once. It's 4 minutes. It packs a lot of content in those 4 minutes. I would love to just hear the piece again, and maybe we'll hear it with different ears now that we've had a chance to talk about it a little bit. So let's run it again.
All right.
I love those chirps and gurgles that spill over at the end. I love that that you included those in the cut. I tried to hear the sound of the wind chimes, and I didn't hear it, but I'll keep listening. I'll go back and see if I can hear them, the spots that you were referring to. We've got a number of other questions that have come in here. So Madeline wants to know if you could score any movie, what would you pick? The listeners have got you. They want you to be a film composer, I think. So
I guess so. That's funny. I really haven't been much of a movie guy until lately. I think quarantine's kind of made me more interested in movies. I don't know. I mean, it'd be difficult scoring for a movie because you'd want to do something that accents the plot, you know, and depending on what the plot is, that might call for very minimal music, you know. So I don't know. Maybe something like kind of abstract would be nice, like a silent film or something. That could be kind of neat, where the music would have to, like, by necessity, play a larger role in kind of forming. Yeah, I don't know. I thought that whoever made the I think it was the Insidious movies made a great effective George Crumb's Black Angels. To be honest, I think if I was doing the music for a movie, I would much rather use other material than my own. I think. I don't know. That's a good question. I have no idea.
Interesting idea. Yeah, be the music advisor. Liam came back with another question. What kind of historical events were you thinking about in the first and final parts of your piece? Do you remember?
So that yeah, but there's none. I mean, that's the thing. You can't. This is really difficult. And the thing I really don't like about music as a form is you can't convey anything specific. You know, you can use a formal tie to a specific thing, but about as specific as you can get is, like, you know, maybe you could, like, say if I had included the melody of Bella Ciao or like The People United Will Never Be Defeated, can evoke to someone like, okay, you know, he has this particular thing in mind. But that's about as close as you can get, which is it's really difficult. You know, maybe I should have been a painter or something. I don't know. But yeah, I wasn't really thinking about anything specifically. Actually, I will say that in the noisy part, if you hear the kind of, like, there's this almost occasionally a noise will kind of jump out, it's kind of a whiny noise. That was recorded for one of your projects. If you remember when we made the music for the documentary, do you remember that?
Yeah, right.
That was from some of the recordings that I was just doing on the guitar. That tied. Yeah.
So we're getting close to the end. So I'm going to ask you to maybe give a quick answer to this question, which is actually a really good one, a musical question. How do you find a good line between disruptive, raunchy noise and a standout melody? And how do you work to combine the two and have them interact?
Oh, man. Well, I think what's cool about music is that things will interact regardless, right? This is something that I really like about, like, Captain Beefheart's music, is that you'll occasionally have these things which they communicate with each other by virtue of just being played at the same time, right? And just because that's the way we hear music, you can, as long as there's something that's repeating, you know, it can be, you know, it can be totally disparate, but they'll create a polyrhythm. You don't have to force it, but they'll create a polyrhythm, or they'll create, like, a tonal relationship, regardless of whether you want it to or not. So I really wasn't too concerned with threading things together, because I just figured they would kind of thread together anyways. And it's very block, you know, like one section will move to the other, like blocks of noise, which is like a kind of John Zorn thing. He, like, does that a lot with Cobra, which I guess bears some resemblance to what I was doing, just in terms of it being like cards and blocks of noise. Obviously, Cobra's improvisational game, which is very, very different, but it's, I guess, you know. But yes, that's a good question. I don't know. I wasn't really trying to make them, trying to weave them together. They definitely, like, stand alone. That's something I'd like to do more of, maybe, is like having kind of trying to weave a closer relationship between these things.
Well, there's always the next piece, and I assume there is a next piece. If we had more time, I'd ask you some questions about that. And I've just tell the listeners, I want you all to watch out for you're going to be opening a Bandcamp account pretty soon, or a Bandcamp site, so people get a chance to hear some more of your music.
Yeah, I really, that's slated for next week. I want to get a Bandcamp up and rolling and put out some recordings that I do have a SoundCloud where there's a bunch of music, but I'd like to get them a little bit more formalized, you know?
Yeah. Good. I think we've got a lot of people who are going to be interested in hearing what you're up to. Christian, it's been really great talking to you today and having a chance to hear the new piece. Thank you so much for writing it for this project, and also send my thanks out to Carolina Performing Arts and the Department of Music at UNC for making this summer program, making it be really wonderful opportunity for us and for these young composers who, one way or another, haven't had an association with UNC. Next week, next Friday on July 17th at noon, the series is going to continue with Daniel Green as the featured composer. I hope people will have a chance to come back, tune in then, and hear what Daniel has come up with. Thanks, everyone, and that will conclude our show for this week.
Thank you so much.
And we change the world.